In this video, I'm going to plot out Dr. Kelsey Joy, my name, and I'm just going to be using the plot function inside of MATLAB to plot every part of my name. First, let's start with a figure. I'm going to set my y-axis and x-axis limit so I have a decent amount of area to work with where I'm going to put all my lines. And I want to make sure to put hold on. I want to make sure all my lines stay on that same graph and I see all of them appearing. So I have to say hold on. Otherwise, I would only see the most recent line appearing. For each of my letters, I'm going to go about a similar process. I want to think about what kind of lines I have in each of those letters. So starting with a capital D, I have a one line vertical that's pretty easy to plot. And then I have this curve. So I could do a circle and cut it in half, or I could do some type of curve line. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is a parabolic equation. So I'm going to go ahead and work with x squared. And now I want to move this around some, that way I can get that kind of curvature that I want for the letter D. And once I have the shape I want, I'm going to have to put it in the direction I want. So there's going to be some rotation involved. For any of my more complicated lines, I'm going to go ahead and work in a different script file. That way I can test them out and play with them until I get the kind of shape that I want, or at least an idea. Then I'll put them on my plot with my full name. So first I'm going to make this parabola and go ahead and look and see what that looks like. Since this isn't going in the direction I want, I'm going to have to rotate it. And I'm going to have to think about how I want to rotate it, which direction. And once I get it rotated, I might have some more scaling that I want to do. Once I get a pretty good idea of the shape that I want, then I can go ahead and put it back in my main script file and plot it on there. Now, after I plot it on here, I'm going to have to shift it some. If I want to shift across the x-axis, then I need to add values to x, shift up the y-axis, add values to y, and shift the opposite directions, then subtract. And if I want to scale it further, I can either use multiplication or division, depending on what I'm trying to do. So once I have my first letter, then I can move on to my second letter. R is kind of a similar situation. I have a single line, and then I have some type of curve. So since I've already been working with the parabolic equation, I'm going to keep going with that. Let's work with x squared again. For my capital D, I wanted a fully symmetrical curve, but for my letter R, I only want part of a curve. So since I only want part of it, that's why I'm going to have the negative side be a little bit smaller than the positive side. And again, once I get my curvature and I'm happy with it, then I need to rotate it, make sure it's the right direction. And once I have it the right direction, I can go ahead and put it into my main script file again and see how that plots onto my main figure. And then I can explore again, shift, scale it, anything that I want to do from there. So I'm going to keep going through this process. The next part I have is a period. If you have a lowercase I and you're trying to plot your name, you can do a similar concept of what I'm doing for the period here. I can use the rectangle function if I want, or I can try the fill function, or I can go ahead and just plot a single point and use a marker. I think I like the marker the best, so I'm going to continue forward with the marker option. The next letter I have is a capital K. Again, I have one vertical line that I can go ahead and start with, and then I have two diagonal lines. If I want, I could use the y equals mx plus b equation, or I can just pick 2 points at the beginning and the end where I want those lines to be. And I'm going to go ahead and just go with the 2 points approach. The next letter in my name is a lowercase e. This one could be a little bit tricky, but if I think about it, I can break it down into part of a circle and then a line. So I'm going to go ahead and start with that part of a circle. Since I want to make sure I get that circle correct first, I'm going to go ahead and work in a different script file just to play around with the circle and make sure I'm happy with how that circle looks and thinking about what my letter E is going to look like. If I wanted a full circle, I would use 2 pi, but since I only want part of a circle, I'm not going to use full 2 pi. If I did 1.5 pi, I would get 3/4 of a circle. And I want a little bit more than that, so I'm going to go ahead and try 1.75. Since I like how this looks, I'm going to put it back into my main script file and then continue forward from there. Once I get that E in the correct placement, I'm going to go ahead and add a line on it. A lot of times it might be helpful to click on your actual figure on your plot, so then you can see the point where these different lines are, and then that can help you get an idea of where that line is going to be placed whenever you're putting a line on your plot. So in this case, when I'm connecting those 2 points on E, if I click on them, I know exactly where I need to put that line across to complete my letter E. Next, I have the letter L, which I'm super excited about because all I need is one vertical line. So I can just continue on and then move on to S, which S might be a little bit intimidating, but if I think about what kind of lines have I seen that look like an S, I can think about, okay, sine waves, cosine waves, one of those looks like an S, or both of them look a little bit like an S. Maybe I'll try exploring with those. So again, anytime I'm doing any exploration, I'm going to go into my other script file. That way I can test out my line and see what it looks like, just plot it by itself. And first I'm going to go ahead and plot a sine wave, and I'm going to go from 0 to 2 pi. So I've plotted it out. I have something that looks like an S. I'm pretty happy with it, but I need to rotate it. Now, if I want to rotate this letter S, I can try to rotate about the origin, but it's not going to do exactly what I want it to do because I'm not symmetrical across the origin. So in shifting this letter S, now I have it symmetrical across the origin. So I can just use the approach of putting y negative x to rotate 90 degrees about the origin. After conquering the letter S, now I just have another letter E. The cool thing is I've already done this, so I can just go copy and paste that. Obviously, I'm going to have to shift it and move it over. So if I look at it, I can keep all of my Y values the same. All I need to do is increase my values for X. That way I can shift that E over to after my S. Now I have the letter Y. I could make Y really curvy, but that's just going to complicate things for myself. So instead, I'm just going to do a simple 2 diagonal lines and have a more simple code for my letter Y. When writing your letters, you might have an idea of how you want them to look and how they could look. Sometimes it might help to go with just how they could look and simplify it a little bit so you have simpler lines to work with. Again, like how I have for Y. The next letter I have is a capital J. This is probably my most complicated letter in my entire name. For the capital J, I could oversimplify it and just put a diagonal line on a straight line, but it'd look really bad. And I don't want it to just look like some weird V or the start of a square root. I want it to look like a letter J with some curvature to it. So I'm going to go ahead and use a parabola. In using a parabola, though, I really want the curvature on the left side, and I don't want it as much on the right side. So when I look at it at first, it has this big curve like a parabola, but I can actually go in and specifically say, okay, for the right side, take those X values after I calculate Y and make them a lot smaller. To do this, I'm setting a condition to reference all the values within X that are greater than 0, and I'm going to say decrease them by 20. And on the left side, all the values less than 0, I'm going to decrease those a little bit just because I want to play with the idea of how it looks and see what that looks like. But the right side is where I really need to decrease them the most. And keep in mind, I need to shift that letter J. I don't want it just sitting on the origin. I want it in line with the rest of my name. So I'm going to use the adding to the x-axis and adding to the y-axis to put it right where I want it. I could stop here with my letter J. It looks good, but I'm going to go ahead and add a line on the top just to make it very clear this is a capital J. Again, I'm just adding a different thing here because it's easy. It's a horizontal line. It doesn't require much effort. Next, I have the letter O. The nice thing is I've already done a circle equation for my letter E. In this case, I do want the full circle, so I'm going to put it back to 2 pi instead of 1.75. And again, a lot of addition just to shift it over to where I want it. And my last letter, I have another letter Y. So again, I'm going to copy and paste what I already have, and then I'm just going to use the same values for the most part and shift it to the right. That way I have my letter Y after O. Now that I have my full name and I'm happy with how it looks, I'm going to go back and modify my X limitation because I actually don't want all this white space after my letter Y. Now that I have my full name and I'm happy with how it looks, my last step is going to be going ahead and modifying the details of how it looks. So I'm going to first go ahead and increase the line width so you can see my name better. I could also change the color, but I kind of like the mix match of all these different colors and it looks like a rainbow. So I'm going to leave it that way. But if I wanted to, I could have another input argument specifically saying what the color should be on every one of these lines. To increase the line width of every one of these lines, I'm going to have to use that line width input argument with the numeric value of how big I want it to be. And every single line I use plot. So a lot of copy and pasting here. And running my code, checking, make sure it's there. And I actually missed a line. So I'm going to go back and make sure I add that line width on that one line I missed. This is bound to happen at times. So that's why it's good to always run our code and make sure we're happy with what we have and test everything out. Well, now I have my whole name and it's actually visible. I'm really happy with it. If I want, I could turn this plot background off by saying axes off, but I kind of like it. So I'm going to leave the axes in the background. That way you can still see the plot in the background. If you're plotting your name, I would love to hear all about it. Please comment and tell me your different experiences or different equations you use. Or if you get stuck, comment and let me know and I'll be sure to give you feedback.